Actually, wisdom is something you obtain just after you needed it, so you get to learn from all the mistakes that I made on my kids that turned out well due to them, not so much due to us. How many of you have kids that are 13 and over? Okay, and then, so hands down, how many have kids 13 and under? So how many have both? Okay, so this is, okay. I was gonna try to divide the two nights up with an emphasis on middle school tonight and an emphasis on high school tomorrow night, so I'll still do some of that, but I think due to the fact that you've got, and this is kind of what I was anticipating, that we've got people sort of all over the map. Who has children 6 and under? Okay, so there's some of you here, okay. The questions will probably drive us to be talking a lot about this topic of individuation. So when we use the word individuation, do any of you know, just right off the top of your head, what that, nobody? Okay. It is, the word has meaning in the field of human development. And so one of the first things I want to do is give you a little bit of a human development roadmap. So all of us, everybody here in the room, is actually on this roadmap also. So for example, as much as this distresses me, Hollis and I are at the second tier to the top, which means that we're old. That's why it distresses me. And this roadmap, it's like saying I'm going to take a trip, I'm going to take a road trip to New York. We can pull out the map and we can look at the map, and that can give us a general idea of what the trip's going to be like, but it won't tell you specifically what your trip's going to be like. So as we go through this material, it'll be presented sort of in a way that makes it sound like this is true for, you know, all people in all places, but you really have to be able to see the roadmap and then be able to apply it to your situation. Because some kids, as we go through this, I'm going to give you age breakdowns for kids that fit into each of these categories. So just to help you out a little bit here, we're going to be talking about identity, competence, initiative, autonomy, and basic trust. Does anybody have a kid that's less than 1 year old? Less than 2 years old? Grandchildren? Okay, less than 3 years old? Less than 4. Okay, so they're 4 to, that group's in the 4 to 6 range. So for example, we'll talk about basic trust in just a minute, and that window is 0 to 12 months. Now the human development windows, so those of you that are 22 to say 40 are in the intimacy window, and there are certain tasks that need to be completed in each phase in order to set you up for the next phase. The earlier in the human development span that something goes wrong and that an individual is not able to complete those tasks, the more difficult each task becomes as they go down the road. So for example, right now, my parents are 90 years old. My dad is well into dementia and he's deaf, and my mom is 90% blind, so they literally are the he's deaf, she's blind couple, and they're still living independently. And so Hollis and I, like in the last 10 days, we spent 4 of those days at their house full-time, basically, kind of enabling them to be there. They're actually, though, they are completing a developmental task right now. Their task is integrity versus despair. So if we were to sit my mom down here, and my mom's cognitively 110% with it. If I move a box at her house, when she also can voice text, and she's the best voice texter in our family. And if I move a box, keep in mind she's 90% blind, I'll get a text about where that box got moved to. So she's on the ball. And so if we could interview her tonight, what she would tell you, the questions she's thinking about is, was it all worth it? How did I do? Did I live my life with integrity, or am I in despair because of all the things that went wrong in my life? And that's a developmental task that people in her age range need to be helped with. So all of us are somewhere on this human development map. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first stage. So for those that don't know me or my story, I was married to Jillian for 25 years. She passed away at the same month that she passed away. My current wife, Hollis, her husband died. We didn't know each other. And so we both took our kids to the Dougie Center in Portland, Oregon, which is a center that specializes in grief for children. And that's actually where we met each other. And so then we married, and she had 2 and I had 4, so we actually had the Brady Bunch, and they did play that song at our wedding, which was 15 years ago. So our kids range from, the youngest is, and I'm at that point, I used to look at my mom and I'd say, how old are you? And she'd go, and I'm at that point where I have to try to figure things out. So our youngest is 22, and our oldest is 36. So we have 6 kids from 22 to 36. So all of our kids right now are in what is called the intimacy stage of development. So basic trust in some ways, so this is the foundation on that pyramid that we looked at just a minute ago. Have you heard of reactive attachment disorder? That is for children. It's a diagnosis which is given to kids who did not develop basic trust. Now, what I'm not going to do, we could spend 3 hours, like if I'm teaching at Western, we spend 3 hours on each of these slides, and we're obviously not going to do that. I am going to slow down at the middle school slide. But the main task of being an infant is to develop trust in the world. So for moms that have, and dads that have a kid that's 12 months and under, I used to tell moms, they'd always be saying, I'm not getting anything done, I've got this baby, it's demanding all my time. And I'd say, on your to-do list today, put develop basic trust. So at the end of the day, you can check that off. The way that the baby develops trust is through getting its needs met. So its needs are pretty simple. It wants to be held. I called it an it. The baby wants to be held. The baby cries. The baby needs to eat. It needs its diaper changed. It's cold. It wants to be warm. So imagine if you're less than 12 months old and you're in your crib and you've woken up from your nap and you're crying and you're sure nobody's ever going to come get you. You're just in there. They're going to find me. 2 years from now, I'll be in this crib dead. And then the door bursts open, and a parent comes in and picks them up. So multiply that times, how many times does that happen during 12 months? It feels like thousands of times. If it happens 5 times a day, that happens over 1,500 times in the child's life. And what happens for that kid is eventually they're like, wow, if you have needs, these people meet them. And that basic trust is what enables them to move on to the next stage, which is, so here's the word right off the bat. So individuation, think of it as a pushing it away in order to become an individual. And kids have a real desperate need to be different than their parents. And so we're going to be talking a lot about this. The first time this shows up is when the baby has mobility. So they become a toddler and they're up walking around and they're kind of zooming around the room. And for them, this is like a major adventure that they can actually do this. And so they'll run to the door and they'll go around the corner and they'll start playing peekaboo with you. And that is a going away and a coming back. And I know it sounds super simple, but this is the first stage where this going away gets tested. So if your kid is doing this with you, if you remember doing this, how did you respond? Do you recall? Pardon me?
Very engaged.
Very engaged with them, good?
I would disagree to an extent.
Okay.
I feel engaged, but when they're trying to do their own thing, I have a 9-year-old who's very independent and kind of wants to learn things on her own, so I would let her heater on a balance beam, and I could just hold her hand and maybe reach it and fall, or I could just let her go on the balance beam and see what happens.
Okay. One thing I don't envy all of you about, there actually is a website called Perfectlysafe.com. And they sell a product for every accident that has ever occurred in the home to a child. They sell a product to prevent that from happening in your home. And as you're aware, I won't use any specifics, there have been terrible accidents in homes, and that's horrible. And we hear about those stories at a level that makes us think that those things are common. And actually, statistically, it has never been safer to be a child than it is today. Having said that, as a parent, I remember sort of hovering over, so Rachel is our firstborn, I remember hovering over her crib listening to her breathe. It's like, is she still breathing? Because you're so worried and you feel all of this responsibility for this child. So when the child goes out into the hallway, it's going to be some sort of mixture of staying engaged with them, but you're also kind of worried about what's going on around the corner. Now, imagine, let me exaggerate a little bit. Imagine if a parent, every single time of those 1,500 times, that kid went around the corner, the parent yelled, "No, don't do that, don't go out of my sight." What would happen with that child? The child would begin to not trust their impulse to leave. And if they can't trust that impulse, they become very confused because the powerful adult is telling them something opposite of what their brain is telling them to do. So this is the first time that individuation gets tested. And it's going to get tested again in early teens. And then the final phase of individuation is in the early 20s when hopefully, now things have changed a lot. When I was graduating from high school and leaving for college, there was sort of a pretty clear cut from home, and not many of us returned back home. And today, especially with the pandemic, we're seeing kids at home for financial reasons, and it can be healthy to do this. There's nothing wrong with it. Inherently, they can be at home until they're almost 30. We've always thought that this individuation, the final cutoff phase, was somewhere in the early 20s, where the children hopefully can achieve financial independence from the parents. It's not that money doesn't flow, but money is not needed. The parents might choose to help, but the child has become financially responsible. That has changed a lot with student loan debt also, because we have kids that are graduating from graduate school. It's not unusual for me to see $100,000 or $120,000 in debt. So that changes a lot of things, but that final phase is in the early 20s. So the first phase is right here. Now, let's say the child is convinced that they can trust, that they can leave. The next thing that they want to do is they want to try things out. So if you can trust the environment and you can leave the environment, now I want to go do things. And I want to, for example, I want to be able to, do kids' shoes tie today, or are we still using Velcro? Both are there. Typical situation, you're trying to get out the door to either school and or church, and you're rushing, and you're doing it for the kid, and depending on which kid we're talking about, if it's your youngest, they're probably letting you do it. If it's your oldest, they're probably saying, I want to do it myself. And it slows things down. I received this lesson, actually, David was in kindergarten at Furwood, and Mrs. Amstead, who taught there for about 120 years. She was a great kindergarten teacher. She is ageless. And he had her, and I was at a parent-teacher conference, and we had gone over, and I was feeling self-conscious about the parent that was waiting, and David's stuff was all spread out on the floor, and so I was like, okay, David, we need to go, and I was scooping it up. And Mrs. Amstead put her hand on my back, and she said, I think David would like to do that himself. And that was a good parenting lesson, to be corrected that the task here of David being able to do something himself is more important than the timing of this. So during this phase is when kids will begin to try things, whether it's throwing the ball or hitting the ball or trying to draw or whatever it is. The main thing is they just want to try. And so the parental object is to let them try that out. We're not worried about success. We're not worried about quality. We're just interested in them feeling like they can take initiative Because remember, these things build on each other. So if I can trust, and I can leave, and I can take initiative, this is the kid who in high school might decide to take chemistry because they want to try that out. And they've been building up to this moment for the last 16 years. So so this is where our 6 to 12, 6 to 13-year-olds are. So we'll pause just a little bit here. By the way, I'm gonna try to kind of slow content down by 8 o'clock. Please ask like clarifying questions. You can stop me, raise your hand. Let's save application questions for 8 o'clock, and then from 8 o'clock on, let's just have open Q&A where we can take, the easiest way to understand this stuff is to take situations and try and apply it to, so like what should I do in this situation? Here's the scenario. So in industry, if you think back to your own 6 through 12-year-old years, what kinds of things do you recall doing in terms of activities? Mine was baseball. I was 6, and I was looking up, and my dad said, I'm going to sign him up for baseball, and my mom said, he'll break his arm, and my dad said, I'm going to sign him up, and she was like, he's going to get hurt. He's going to break his arm. And so my dad signed me up, and I broke my arm 3 times over the next, 12 years playing baseball. So for me, it was baseball, and I was in Los Angeles, and myself and all of my friends, we all thought we were going to play for the Los Angeles Dodgers. What kinds of things did you do? What do you recall doing? Baseball? Are you a professional baseball player today? No. Missed it by... I know, me too. I had the same coach. What else? Dirt bikes. Track. Did anybody do musical kinds of things, instruments? Okay. Whatever you were in love with from 6 to 12, raise your hand if you're still doing it today. Okay, so we've got 2 people. The point that I want to make is it doesn't really matter what the kid does. What's important is they do something. So I desperately wanted one kid to play baseball. I didn't end up with any baseball players, but 2 of them started. And so they started at T-ball. You just sign up, you go out there. They don't even know what the score is. And then eventually they graduate to the point where they're going to have pitches and there's tryouts. So it was springtime and we were at the dinner table and I said, hey, Dylan and David, you guys want to go out for baseball this year? And they're both like, yeah, sounds great. And I said, okay, tryouts are next Saturday. Silence. They said, do you mean you have to be good? Because we had never done tryouts. And now what happens is the kid either decides I can't do that, that sounds too scary, or they end up in the backyard with one of their parents throwing them 10,000 pop flies with a tennis ball. Because what? Well, you have to practice. And so that's what's happening during industry. What you want is for your kid to find something that they're interested in, that they apply themselves to, and then they learn that in order to be good at something, you have to practice it. And the more you practice it, the better you get. Now, it's almost a guarantee that whatever our kids do between 6 and 12 and 6 and 13, they're probably not going to be doing later in life, but that's not what it's about. Even though the kid thinks it is, in some cases, that's not actually what it's about. What you want them to understand is if they're going to make that decision to take advanced chemistry when they're in high school, it means they're going to have to work. So this is the stage where kids will try things out, and then as a parent, you have to go through this process of negotiating with them when they want to quit. I recall one, this is typical of a lot of conversations I had. It was an evening session with a 13-year-old. Her mom came in, and her mom said she wants to quit ballet, and I told her, it's up to you. She pointed at me. Counselors are sometimes subcontracted parents. Well, obviously, I was not going to make that decision. So we went back and sat down, and she told me why she wanted to quit. It didn't really have anything to do with ballet. She was actually really good and had spent much of her 6 through 13 years doing ballet. And what ended up happening was there was a relationship problem at her ballet group, and her solution was to quit. And so I was asking her, you probably have had this conversation, how much have your parents spent on it roughly so far? And ballet, if you've had, it's not inexpensive. You're buying outfits and paying for lessons and shoes and all of this. So she came up with some number that was probably close. I had one ballet kid, so I kind of knew. They were well into their season where they were practicing their dance, which they were going to be presenting at the recital, and she was going to be dropping out of that, which was going to empty a spot, which was going to create a problem. And so I said, well, you can quit. I mean, because people do quit. So I can't tell you you can't quit because we can't force you to go. But if you do quit, you're going to need to reimburse your parents for the cost so far, and you're going to need to call your ballet teacher and go to one last class and explain to the girls that you're quitting and you're not going to be finishing with them. And so she decided to continue. Yeah. Because what you want kids to get is that when you commit to something, there is a process or there's consequences to dropping it. And initially, these lessons are really small. So it's something small, like quitting ballet. So kids need opportunity, they need encouragement, and they need family resources. This is how old I am. Sports in high school were free. I actually had kids at Sandy the first year they introduced fees for sports, and we were shocked. 300. What is it today to play a sport in high school? Does anybody know? About 250. Well, it hasn't changed much. Okay, Sandy at the time was 300, and you could max out, I think at that time, at 900. That was a lot of money for the family to come up with. So these things are not inexpensive. So the parent and the child sort of join forces and make attempts. We're taking risks, so we're going to go out for baseball, and I might be the last person picked, which is terribly embarrassing. So we're taking risks. We try to navigate these outcomes in a supportive way for our kids. We want them to face the consequences of things that they try, and that could involve losing or not doing well and trying to process that. So that middle box at the bottom down there, success and failures are met with parental interest, involvement, training, and warmth and respect. Now, I am not categorizing my father as a bad father, but this was a bad parenting moment. And I knew it at the time, I just didn't know how to talk to him about it. I was a baseball player. They recruited baseball players to umpire the littler leagues, and so I was an umpire one year, and I was umpiring at home plate, and I anticipated a play at the plate. These kids are like 9 years old, so when I say play at the plate, I mean it's 9 years old throwing the ball, getting tagged. And the throw was so bad, I didn't think the catcher, I was thinking the kid's gonna be safe, and so I anticipated it and I called the kid safe, but I'll be darned if the catcher didn't catch the ball on a hop and tag the kid out. And I walked over and I opened up his mitt and he had the ball in it, and so then I called the kid out. And one of the dads in the stands lost it. If he could have come through a chain link fence, he would have come through the fence to come at me. Now, I'm like 15 years old, and so this is a lot for me to being yelled at by this dad, and he just did not relent. And so I made a terrible mistake, and so my dad is there watching this. There's another play at the plate, and this kid is out by 20 feet. And so I called the kid out, and I turned to the dad in the stands, and I said, I suppose you think he was safe. And it was so bad, the pandemonium was so bad, he had to be restrained and taken to the parking lot. It was terrible. It was really bad. And so I got home that day. My dad had been in a separate car than I was. I got home and I walked into our family room, and my co-umpire and I, we were so overwhelmed as these 14 or 15-year-olds that we went back to the umpire shack and we quit. And I got home and I walked in and I said, that was terrible, and I quit. And in retrospect, I was looking for my dad to encourage me or to talk to me about how that went. And he said, yeah, I know, I was so embarrassed. So that is not, what you want to do is you want to respond to everything with parental warmth and respect. The key thing is that you're in conversation with your middle schooler about these outcomes. It doesn't matter whether it's chess club or ballet or baseball or basketball or dirt bike riding or whatever it is that they're doing. As they're doing it, this is hard. It's easy to stand here and talk about doing this. You want to train them and you want to be involved. You don't want to be judgmental about what they're doing, and you don't want that to be that parent that needs them to do well for you. You need to let them face the outcomes of the effort that they put in. A good example of that, my son David, so our older kids all excelled at academics, and so then along came David. So he was, out of my 4 bio kids, David was the kid who most vocally didn't want to be me. And so he was working on, this is probably like 6th grade here. You know how you used to color map in, and colors meant things. And so I was sitting at the table, he was coloring his map, I was probably working on something for school, and he set his pencils down and he said, I'm done. And he was about 70% done. And I said, do you mean done for tonight, or do you mean like done? And he goes, no, I'm done. And I said, well, I said, you can be, but I think you're probably going to get like a C on that. And he goes, oh, that sounds good. And so I let him turn it in, and he got a C on that. And you have to let the kid do that without being judgmental about that. So at one point, David came to me and he said, you and Rachel and Peter and Esther are all about school and education, and I am not. And boy, did he fulfill that, because he got expelled from Sandy High School within 90 days of stepping foot on the campus. So he had a spectacular, and by the way, he actually assisted me in writing an article about his expulsion and kind of the impact it had on his life. And it was actually one of the best things that could have happened. He hated school. And so he was moved to alternative schooling and eventually ended up in outdoor work, which was really his net. That's where he needed to be. But he differentiated, that's one word, or individuated in a very clear way. A lot of times kids are not announcing to you that they're individuating. David, it was pretty clear because he was announcing to me that he was going to be individuating from me. So you have to respond to that when they're being different than you. In that situation, you want to say, well, if you get a C on this, what's that going to happen to your grade? What kind of impact's that going to have? And then you let them make that decision. Do they still have science fairs? Is that a thing in school? Okay. I don't remember science fairs here. I do remember them at Furwood. Our kids did a mixture of schooling, and I remember the 4th grade science fair because I had Esther do the project herself. It was a little perpetual motion thing run by a battery, and when we got to the science fair, I realized that we were looking at all the projects that the parents had done. There was a kid there that actually had a working hoverboard. And keep in mind, this is Esther's 4th grade. So this is probably 2000 maybe, right around there. And when you're doing their work for them, you're not, if you will, assisting them in that individuation process. Now, the negative outcome, so trust, autonomy, I can leave you, initiative, I can try things, competence, I can become competent at something, is a really necessary building block because we're about to enter the tumultuous years of teenage. And if a child doesn't have something they can do as they enter their adolescence, they're really in trouble, because they're going to need something to get through those years where there is so much angsting that's going on. So the bad outcome is when there's failure, lack of support for the kid, disencouragement, if you will, criticism or judgment. For any of you that work with kids, you know, I see kids come into the counseling center, not so much here anymore because I was in a counseling center in Portland called Sunnyside, and we saw uninsured families. So we were with lower socioeconomic groups, and I had an awful lot of single parents. I single parented for 5 years. I have to tell you, if you haven't done it, it's really hard to understand. I would have not actually made it through if it wasn't for the generosity and support of a lot of people. When you're single parenting, what I'm talking about here can almost feel like a pipe dream. And I've had kids show up for counseling. I've actually given trumpet lessons. I don't know the trumpet. My mom is a master musician. She can play probably 30 instruments. And so this little girl wanted to be in the band, and her parent had got her a trumpet, but couldn't get her to any trumpet lessons or anything, so she was carrying this thing around with her. And so in a counseling session, I called up my mom, put her on speakerphone, and my mom walked us through, and by the end of that hour, we actually had that little girl playing scales on this horn, and we had also ruined every other counseling session in the center that night. But it was so important, to me, it was so important to give her some support so that she could be successful at something, so that she had something to identify with. Like, I'm a baseball player, I'm in the band, I'm a ballerina. Those things are going to go away, but they're going to be a lifeline during adolescence. So the negative outcome is when a child is heading into the adolescent years, essentially feeling inadequate and inferior. And you have to remember, the adolescent years are going to be sending that message a lot to them. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let me pause here on this slide. Questions about this right here? Okay. Part of the reason, that's a great question, part of the reason I feel passionate about this topic is that I've found that as parents, we interpret a lot of developmental stuff as misbehavior. And so what I would argue in the situation with David, the example that I used, turning in his work at a 70% level fell within the acceptable range. Now, if it was a situation where he was saying, I'm not going to do it, we'd have to choose a different path right there. But he was already at that point expressing to us his dislike for education. And it wasn't entirely, I also want to tell you, his skill set has always been outside the classroom. So he's, right as we speak, he's becoming a certified arborist. And he is wildly successful at that. He loves climbing trees. He loves working in the outdoors. We sent him to, if you've ever heard of Outward Bound, it's an organization that takes kids on outdoor adventures, and they test them out there in the wilderness. And so he went on this 4-week Outward Bound experience, and we live up on the base of Mount Hood, and we have some acreage. And when he came home, he said, is it okay if I live in the woods? And we were like, I guess so. I mean, it's on our property. He actually moved out into the woods for a while. And keep in mind, this is Oregon. It is wet and not comfortable, and that's never really bothered him. So at that point, I was also thinking he's expressing who he is here by not being his brother, who finished every map, she knows Peter. When Peter started high school, he announced to us that he was going to be valedictorian, and he was valedictorian, but not because his IQ is 140, it's because he's Peter. I would guess his IQ is in an average range, but he applies himself. So if you know what the Ironman competitions are, the first Ironman he ever participated in, he qualified for the World Championships in Kona and then raced there also. He did it on hard work, not on athletic ability. And David was differentiating himself from that brother, because you also have to take the kid and put them in the context of the family. And remember, every kid needs a role. And in our family, the academic roles were already taken. Actually, Esther, who's the third oldest, I don't know how she did this, but when she went into high school, so her brother was valedictorian, her sister was salutatorian, and Esther said, I'm going to bury them. When I graduate from here, they won't even remember who Peter and Rachel were. Much to her chagrin, the French teacher, she took French for 4 years, and all the way through high school, all the Sandy High School teachers called Esther Rachel. They're just, you're Rachel Wenzel. And she corrected her the first semester. She kept saying Esther, she kept saying Esther. And the second semester she stopped. And for the next 3.5 years, the French teacher called her Rachel. And she has a resilient personality and take that. But she also chose academics, and she kind of forged her own path on that. But your kids have to have a role. And you need to make space for them to have a role, and usually roles that are taken, the next kid will pick a different role, because I have to, what are kids after? They're after really two main things, attention and power. And if I'm gonna get attention, I'm gonna have to do something different. And if I'm gonna have power, I'm gonna have to do something that affects the system. And you want to leverage those two things for the positive, and obviously not attention and power through negative behavior. So that was perhaps not as black and white as you would hope for, but I would look at what is kind of the realm of acceptable, and is what the kid is doing within that realm. And they may be choosing to be different than you, and that's where it gets hard, because we don't want to create mini-me's with our kids. Okay, so we're leaving middle childhood, and we're into identity. Now, because we're going to talk more about this tomorrow night, I won't spend as much time right here. Teenage years, when Peter graduated, this has always amazed me. The superintendent was giving the speech at graduation, and I don't remember her name, but she said to the kids, you're wrapping up what will have been the best years of your life. And I thought, excuse me, because they don't print enough money for me to go back through high school again. I don't know about you. In retrospect, I had a lot of things that I enjoyed. I was on the baseball team. I had friends. I would not go through high school again. Talk about angsty. And now, one thing I really miss parenting. I loved it. We've got grandchildren, so I'm getting to do that. But I loved having family and kids and all the heartaches and all the joys that go with that. One thing I do not envy today's parents is trying to navigate high school and electronics. When I was parenting in high school, you could shut it off. I mean, you could literally shut it off at the end of the day, and there's no way to shut it off. I have kids walking into my office with spare phones. Their parents take their phone away from them, and their friend gives them a phone. I mean, I have multiple kids that have 2 phones. They have the phone for the parents, and then they have the phone that they actually use. I have kids that have multiple Instagram accounts, social media, there's so many social media apps, it's hard to keep up with them. But when I was parenting, you could actually monitor their social media page, and that's over. So this is one area that is extremely difficult, which we'll talk more about tomorrow night. In a nutshell, what kids are needing during their teenage years, those top 4 things feel like they don't go together. So you've got validation, freedom, responsibility, and limits. So yes, I'm using the word freedom and limits. Kids need choice within parameters. And this is the stage. So my age group, we differentiated from our parents with music and with long hair. I am really embarrassed. I didn't actually realize this till about 15 years ago. I pulled out my high school graduating class. There was about 400 of us. And much to my, I didn't know this. At the time, I had the longest hair in the entire graduating class. It was down to my shoulders, and I do not remember that that was like that. My dad hated it. It really galled him. He actually would make comments about me being a girl because of the length of my hair, which I hated, and I now realize what was going on there. He and I were in a bit of a power struggle. And so you have to figure out, how do we do this with our kids? So just a quick anecdote to illustrate it, and I'll use David again. By the way, my kids do not, it's all good. We talk about each other. We talk about our journey together. So I'm not talking behind their backs. For some reason, this white middle-class suburb dad had 3 kids with dreadlocks. I don't really know how that happened. Rachel decided to do it when she was at Whitworth for 1 year. I'm going to have dreadlocks, and she did it, and at the end of the year, she cut them off. And then Esther did it, and Esther went on for more like 4 years, and then David did it. Esther and Rachel both kept their hair very clean, and they attended to it. David got dreadlocks by not taking care of his hair. So at one point, Hollis and I, so I was remarried to Hollis at this point, and we're like, what are we going to, because it was driving me nuts, and we've got to do something about this. And so I'll talk more about this later. We said we have to join is what we're going to do. And so we went to David and we said, well, tell you what, we will pay to have your dreadlocks done professionally. And because if you're going to have them, let's have them be great. Let's have them be super great. So I got onto the internet and I found the dreadlock queen in Portland. I don't know what your picture is, but yes, it was in between 2 tattoo shops in Southeast Portland. So we drive up and we walk in, and the inside of the place was everything that you're thinking right now. And so we sit down, and then the dreadlock queen comes out, and it is a white blonde hair, straight blonde hair, clean-cut young woman. And she comes over, introduces herself, talks to me for a few minutes. She was so good with David. She said, I can see that you've been working on your dreadlocks. And so she said, because you've been working on them, we didn't talk about price, but I'll do it for $110. It's normally $140. I'm like, okay, come back and get them in 2 hours. So I come back and get them in 2 hours, and they look great. The dreadlock queen, she did her thing. That weekend, David goes on a young man retreat with a group in Sandy called the Ant Farm, and they're off in the desert doing guy kinds of stuff, and he got a ride home late on Sunday night, so I hadn't seen him. And on Monday morning, I'm sitting at the kitchen counter getting ready for work or whatever, and he comes up the stairs. I got my back to him, and I hear him come up the stairs, and he goes, hey, Dad, and I was like, hey, David, and he comes around the island to the kitchen and stands in front of me with his head shaved. And at the retreat, the other young men had said to him, you're a poser, you're trying to be something you're not. And David was like, oh, okay, let's cut him off. And so I had just spent $110 to get them right, and they lasted 48 hours. I didn't even get to enjoy them. He was gone. This is trying, and to find a way to be supportive of this and to join in can be very, very tricky. The teen is going to send you messages where they're pushing you away and then they're pulling you back close at an unexpected moment. Teens don't talk on a schedule. By the time they're teenagers, when they come to counseling, they more or less know that's time to talk. And when I'm working with teens, I get everything from kids who come in, sit down, and pull their hoodie over them and will try not to talk to me. How do you solve that? You got a boy sitting in front of you, and he's pulling his hoodie over his head. You buy a $5 pizza, and set it on the sofa. It's a small investment in today's youth, and the hoodie comes off and they're eating and you're talking. I get everything from that to, more often than not, it's young women who come in with a list of things to talk to me about, and then they'll talk for the entire hour. The point is, teens talk when they're ready to talk. They don't talk on your schedule. You can get together with your friends for 10 o'clock, have coffee and you know you're going to talk to each other. You can't do that with teens because they may not be ready to talk, because who knows how they're feeling when they, at any given moment. Esther used to come in from school, head down, depressed look on her face, disappear downstairs, and Hollis was like, oh, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, it's not about us, you keep telling yourself this. 15 minutes later, she comes up, she's smiling. I have no idea what happened, but in 2 hours, it may go the other direction again. So this is a roller coaster ride, and we'll talk more about managing this tomorrow night. Now, I'm going to just go to what not to do. Oftentimes, we can learn what to do by what not to do. So first of all, don't parent with obedience as your goal. I'm actually most worried about this in the Christian subculture because we actually emphasize obedience for a number of reasons. Obedience is not the outcome you want. I have worked with tons of kids that were very obedient, and then I did clinical supervisor work at Multnomah, so we were working with kids straight out of high school, kids mainly from Christian homes. I cannot even begin to tell you the amount of problems we were dealing with kids once they were out of their parents' house and they didn't have the monitoring in terms of what they went through. So I'll tell you what we do want as a goal later. You don't want to create your clone. Being different is not a deficit. I mean, imagine if your kids actually did all turn out like you. Not a good thing. You may be a wonderful person, but you want them to be better, actually. I hope my kids are going to be better than me, and they're going to do that differently. So when they are different, don't think of that automatically as a deficit. And don't parent out of your own disappointment. Now, here's something virtually all of us do. We identify things that our parents did, and then we commit ourselves to not doing that. And oftentimes we do actually correct that, but while we're busy correcting that, we make another set of mistakes that our kids are going to have to correct when they have kids. And don't utilize isolationism as a primary tool. And what I mean by that is that task right now where your kids are over plugged into the world. The solution to that is not complete isolationism. The question, when should a child get a phone? When should a kid get a phone? Never. I don't know. I have fifth graders that come into my office with a phone. Back in around 2000, when this big building wasn't here and we just had the original set of buildings, I was doing a training for the Good Shepherd teaching staff, and at the time the school had the policy no phones. I mean, that's like, really? Because now phones are integrated into the classroom. They're integrated into their assignments. The assignments are online. They're expected to go to the online classroom, which means they've got their phones, which means they have internet access. And so the ability to shut off. Kids should get a phone when that individual child is ready. The bad news is, in my estimation, the self-control that's required for a phone, they probably will not have the neurological self-control necessary till their early 20s. So you're handing a device to kids that requires self-control that they literally do not have. I know that sounds discouraging, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow night. But isolationism is not the answer. All right. I think we're coming out of an age of overparenting. I was the front end of the age of overparenting, so I'm at the very, depending on whose book you read, I'm either part of the baby boomers, I would be like the last year, or I'm in the lost generation that didn't really have an identity. So my dad was in the Korean War, not in World War II. And I grew up with parents. My mom will tell you she had one parenting book. It was Dr. Spock's book. And there was a couple more books that were written during the 1960s that were not widely circulated. A young woman who's pregnant invited me over to come see their nursery. They were students, and we had a friendship. The first baby, and she invited me to come see the nursery that she had set up. She's 8 months pregnant, and I come into the nursery, and we're looking at the crib and the bumper pads and the rocking chair, and on the dresser right there is 10 parenting books that she got at her baby shower. We are inundated with parenting information today. We have way too much parenting information. So my generation and following decided to offset the emotional neglect of our parents, and we became overly involved. and we over-parented our kids, and that has continued, I think, up until kind of around 2010. Articles started showing up on over-parenting. Signs of over-parenting: interfering when there's a conflict with siblings. I won't go into depth right now. Siblings should figure it out themselves as long as nobody is bleeding and no property is being destroyed. You want them to figure it out, and I am not worried about the littlest kid in the room because they become so sneaky with the power that they get. They will figure out how to do it, and they need to learn that skill set because they're the youngest kid in the room. Constant clashing over clothes, music, and etc. Pick battles. We totally, I don't know if I've actually ever told Esther this, so this may be dangerous publicly. So she came to me, so we had remarried. As you can imagine, this is a blended family. Esther lost her mom. She's got a new mom that I chose for her. So she and Hollis had some things they had to work out. And so Esther came to me, say at age 16 or 17. We got married when she was 14. And she said she wanted to get a nose ring and more ear piercings and a belly button ring. And I said, well, I need to think about it. And so I went to Hollis, and I said, well, so here's the deal. I really don't care. I acted like I cared, but what I want you to do is be the hero, and I want you to go to her and say, I talked to your dad. He won't let go of the nose ring and the belly button ring, but I talked him into multiple ear piercings if you can go with that. And so Esther thought she won, and Hollis got to take her and got to have a win with her. You've got to let them differentiate, and had she gotten those piercings, honestly, I would not have really cared because those are not battles that I'm concerned about. If you find yourself clashing over what I call kind of non-issues, I'm concerned about the development of character quality. That's why I said don't parent for obedience. We had a practice of each year sitting down. We did a marital retreat each year, and we asked ourselves, what character qualities does each of the kids need to work on? And we thought about what the character qualities were, and then we thought about how we're going to work with them to work toward those character qualities. It doesn't have anything to do with obedience. Doing your kids' homework for them, not a good sign if you're doing that. And I know that especially in high school, the amount of homework they're getting assigned these days, if they're taking upper level classes or they're taking classes that are college prep classes, trying to get some taken, what do you call the classes that are college level, college credit? Those are hard classes. They need to do the work themselves. Intervening with a teacher on grades, you need the kid to intervene for themselves. Hollis's biologically oldest, our age-wise fourth kid is Aiden. And when he was in high school, and Aiden laughs about this today, he was really good at math, and he, during high school, was very arrogant. And he'll tell you that today himself. And so when he took a math class, Sandy had a replacement teacher who wasn't really, she was trying hard, but it wasn't her area. And so in front of the class, Aiden told her that he knew more about math than she did and embarrassed her in front of the whole class, which didn't go well for him. And when that conflict arose, we did not get involved. We said, you're gonna have to go back. You need to solve this for yourself there, because they're gonna have to learn that you practice when you're in high school, because the articles that scare me to death are parents who are intervening in their college kids' classes. There's a young woman, she's now 35, when she applied to Western, she had homeschooled, and she went through school really rapidly, so she finished college when she was 20, and she showed up at Western Seminary when she was 21 and applied for the counseling program. And it's really hard to put a 21-year-old in the counseling chair who hasn't lived a life yet. And so we said, yes, Heather, you can get in the program, but we're going to slow you way down, and you're going to take 4 years to graduate, and we're going to limit the number of classes that you can take. Her mom called me, and this is to this day, she is so angry about this. Her mom called me without telling her and intervened and wanted to know why I was limiting with the classes that her daughter could take. That's over-parenting. Leave your kids alone at school unless you have to talk to them. There are surveillance methods today. We can talk more about this tomorrow night for those that come tomorrow night. You don't want to spy on kids, and there's lots of ways to do that. And I know that you can make a good argument for why you maybe should be doing that. It does not set a good precedent. Remember, the most powerful teacher is social modeling. And so if you do something, if you search your kid's room, and Steve Keels and I disagree about 100% on this, by the way, just so you know, I'm not giving you the gospel truth, I'm giving you a way to do it. But I feel strongly about this. Steve feels like it's your house, you should be able to look. I feel like that's their territory. You can say to them, for the following reasons, I feel like we need to look through your room. I'm fine with that. And if they say no, you say, well, I'm going to have to anyway. But don't do it when they're not home. Don't clean their room when they're on. I had a mom walk into the therapy office and put a box down in front of me, literally, and said, I cleaned my daughter's room while she was on a sleepover, and here's what I found. And I was scared to death what was in the box. You can imagine what I was thinking, but I didn't look at it. Because I did not want that teenage girl walking into my office with me having looked through her personal stuff. And in the days in between, I thought, it was in my office. I'm like, what is in the box? I mean, are there needles and like sex paraphernalia and condoms and stuff like that? And so she comes in and she sits down and she was mad. And my mom basically searched my room and called it cleaning. And she was looking at the box, and I said, I haven't looked at it yet. And she was really nervous, and she picked it up and it was music magazines. If you remember what a magazine is, it was music magazines. Some Marilyn Manson stuff and some kind of dark stuff, but it was like, oh, this is like not a big deal. We don't want to monitor them at that level when they're in their high school years. If you're doing, this is a little extreme, if you're doing anything for them that they're capable of doing themselves, you may be in the danger of overparenting. So for example, maybe I'm speaking to moms more than dads here, kids should be washing their clothes by the time they're ready to go away to college. And if they're in college, I don't mind if you surprise them by doing a load occasionally for them. Maybe you go visit them and you help clean their room if they asked you to, or maybe they come home from college because they're at the University of Oregon and they bring their laundry with them and you maybe help them. I just don't want it to be the practice. And so kids, I have seen college kids that have never had a bank account and their parents were just sending them money and they have no idea how to manage a budget. Whitworth, much to my horror, on the week that you drop your kids off and go through, there were banks in there opening accounts for students and giving them debit cards that snapped onto their key ring So they could walk around campus just using this debit card, and a lot of these kids have had no training on how to do something like that. So, signs of overparenting, validation, and I'll stop here and open it up for questions. What are you validating? Teenagers need validating. Middle school kids need validating. What you're validating is their feelings and their thoughts. You're not agreeing with them. You're actually listening at a level where the kid feels heard. That does not mean that you necessarily agree with them, and they're going to say wild things to you, some of which, frankly, they're trying on in that moment. Classic situation, I had a kid in a counseling session. I'm running away to California. Oh, really? Yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow. Where are you going? Well, I met a kid at camp last summer, and they live in California, and they told me that I can come down to their house anytime, so I'm going there. Has this been talked? Have you worked? No, but I'm going to call him. Okay, I can see where this is going. And so I didn't say you can't do it. I just sat with that and said, well, it sounds like you're really struggling right now and having a hard time at home, and you've got this plan that you're thinking about doing. Now, the one thing that's nice about counseling is you're not the parent, so it's a little easier to let go, obviously. You could have this conversation with my kid, and I can have this conversation with your kid, easier than you can have it with your own kid. And you know what's happened. The next week they came back in, and there was no talk about California. That's a perfect example of how teenagers try things on. And a lot of times, what you don't want to do is you don't want to put them in the spot or the position of taking a position to be opposite from you. They will take a position that they don't necessarily even feel committed to, but just to be different from you. They will, if they figure out that it irritates you, they will start digging in on that, and you can actually push them further. Do you know why teenagers left Facebook? Because all their parents got on Facebook. They were like, we're out of here. Their parents were like, we're in the neighborhood, and they're like, we're out of the neighborhood. And then it became the social app for middle-aged people. And so what you don't want to do is have them, as I was talking about earlier, have them essentially in a position where they have to be you. You actually want them to pick functional areas of differentiation and let them have some wins on their sense that they're able to be different than you. So, kind of join the direction they're going. If they're saying, this was super hard for me. David chose skateboarding. This is super dangerous. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you we were on a first-name basis with the orthopedic department at Sunnyside. It was like, oh, David, you're here again. Collarbone, head concussion that put him on a 30-second loop, scared the daylights out of Hollis. She got a call because a kid showed up at the fire station in Sandy. Some kids dumped him onto the pavement there. He had been down at the skate park, and when they were talking to him, he didn't have any ID on him, and he used the word Hollis. And the administrative assistant at the fire station knew Hollis, and she thought there's only one Hollis. And so she called Hollis, and she said, I think David's at the fire station. Hollis gets up there just in time to get into the ambulance. They're headed down to Sunnyside, and David's like, what happened to me? You were skating down the hill at the skate park, and you crashed and hit your head. You've got a head injury. Oh, my God, that's terrible. What happened to me? This went on for the next 2 hours. He shattered his ankle. He's got plates on his right side. And before the surgery, I said, so, can you open up the left side while you're there and just pre-install plates on his leg? He doesn't know this yet, but I bought him a gift for his birthday, and it's a T-shirt, and it says, concrete and iron may break my bones, but plates and screws can fix me. It was really hard to join. The subculture of skating, I didn't care for it. I was not a skater. The danger of skating, I didn't care for. I have to tell you today, he skateboards, and it is a picture to see. He is really skilled. He's a lot safer than he used to be. He does have a lot of plates in his body. But it became a very important thing for his life. And the whole time, I was in angst about that. So this stuff isn't easy, but you try to join the direction that they're going, and I can't remember what that application is right there, so I'm going to stop talking. So let me open it up to questions now. Yeah. About phones? So I don't consider that spying. So when you do, when you do decide to get them a phone, for those of you that haven't yet, you absolutely want to have a phone contract. If you don't have one and you need one, email me and I can send you the template that we use. And it's a contract that talks about who owns the phone. And because of the cost of phones, when my kids were getting phones, phones were free. So this presented another conundrum. Now phones are $1,000, and kids expect to have a new phone like every couple of years. And so you want to work with a lot of things here. You want to work on expectations, on finances, on responsibilities. So by way of example, I'm completely comfortable if you say, I own that phone and I'm letting you use it. And here are the parameters by which you get to use it. And then you decide what's right for your kid and your family. We're expecting C or better grades. Here's the household duties that you have that you need to cooperate and do. And so you give them the outline of things that enable them to have the privilege of the phone. Always make sure that your child's privileges and responsibilities are equal. The danger is when privileges exceed responsibility. I have kids walking around, come into my office with $2,000–$3,000 worth of electronic equipment they've got with them, computers, phones, and all this, and we're buying our kids way too much stuff. And so if you want to say, this is my phone, you get to use it, and part of the contract for right now is that I can do random checks, and that means the entire phone. I can go through text messages, I can go through the apps. By the way, this is not foolproof. You're probably aware there are a dozen ways kids get around this stuff today, but I still consider it an involved parental thing to do. And you can also say, I don't want to do this. I have so much other stuff that I want to do that you can actually work your way out of having me do any random phone checks. And that's by conducting yourself in such a way that we have a trust relationship. Because if I can trust you, so my thought is you want your kids able to do everything they need to do to function by age 18. They should have participated in every house chore, have trained for that. They should be managing a bank account. They should have a job. If you are going to have them drive, they should have some skin in the game. I can tell you what I don't want. I don't want kids to be given a $20,000 car and have the parent paying for insurance and gas. And then when they wreck it, and this does happen, when they wreck it, you buy them another one. That's worst case scenario. A good thing, we did this with our kids. So what actually, I will say quickly, what I did in the middle was I was at the high school one day and there was a pickup truck in the parking lot that was beat to crap. And it only had about 110,000 miles on it, and the kid only wanted $2,000 for it. And so I snatched this thing up, and my next 3 kids learned how to drive on that truck, and it was so beat up, I didn't care. I don't know if they scratched it or not, because it was so bad. It had been used on a construction site, so the mechanics of the truck were in fantastic shape, but the outside of the body was just beat up. That's a good option right there. If you buy them a car, if you participate, I would go half and half. We did this with Dylan, for example. His sister sold him a car for $4,000. We did $2,000. Dylan matched us at $2,000. And in our case, Initially, when they were in high school, we had them doing half of their insurance and all of their gas. And then at the end of high school, they're taking on insurance and gas. And if it's a shared vehicle, we would split repairs. If it's their vehicle, they need to take on those repairs. Some modification of all of that. There's no black and white here. But spying, to me, is when you're taking their phone when they don't know it. If you're announcing to them, that's not spying. That's just, yeah. Does he know that? Yeah, if he knows it.
So it's if he doesn't know.
Whose phone is it? Is it your phone or his phone?
It's my phone.
It's your phone. So you have Find My Devices on because it's your phone and you want to know where it is. I know, but if you're telling the kids you're doing it, to me, that's not surveillance. I'm talking about you're doing things that they don't know about, which creates a distrustful relationship if they find out. And if you initiate the distrust, that's not a good position to be in. Your kids will initiate distrust regularly because they're teenagers and that's part of their job. And so then we work on restoring trust, and they restore trust through follow through and that kind of thing. But in these cases, when I use the word spying, I'm talking about something more insidious. And there's a lot of things you can do. If you haven't Googled, or if you haven't searched on Amazon for spy tech, you can essentially become James Bond. You can buy devices really inexpensively that you can put on cars and track cars. And, these air tags, people are now finding out that people are slipping them into, stalkers are using them. So there's a lot of insidious stuff out there that some parents use to monitor. In the name of safety, I'm more concerned about trust. What else? Yes.
I have a young daughter who has older brothers, and they live at their father's house. So when she goes over there, she just kind of will leave openly there. So she's come home a little bit with an attitude of smoking weed is okay to do, and it's an odd moderation. I mean, she's trying to test out that it's equivalent to adults having wine. And so she's just really normalizing it and testing that. She's very, of course, I would never do it, but she's just really, like a little raptor hitting the cage. She's just really testing why is this a line for me? Other conversation, like one, it's your age that you're, and then it falls on adults and adults making themselves of their moderation. Go into almost argument or a title of it, but it keeps because there's exposure.
Does anybody know, since the legalization of marijuana in Oregon, what age group use has just skyrocketed in my age group? So it is just shot through the roof, 60 and older. And so if you go into a dispensary, it's mainly gray-haired people in the dispensary. My theory is it's a group of people that smoked pot in high school, and now, they're not going to go down to the street corner and buy it, but they'll walk into a dispensary and buy it. It's really hilarious, the outcome of that bill. So a couple of thoughts. Marijuana has become very commonplace here in Oregon, and it will be if it's not already nationwide. And frankly, there are some arguments that in terms of the impact economically on our culture, drinking is by far worse. So the kids, if they want to get on the internet and come up with an argument to compare those two things, I wouldn't go down that path because they actually have a case at that point. What you ask yourself in a situation is, what story do I want to tell about this interaction 5 years from now? And what outcome do I want? And so I'm less concerned about the actual use of marijuana at this moment with this particular kid. And I'm more concerned about what the relationship with their parents is going to be 5 years from now. So here's the guideline that I try to use, is as a parent, I want to remain askable. So I want to be the kind of parent that at any point during their life, my kids feel like they can ask me a question. Now, what is an unaskable parent? An unaskable parent is a parent that focuses on the behavior. What are you doing? And it's either right or wrong. An unaskable parent is a parent that really can't have a conversation with a kid who has a different position than they do on something. So, for example, on the marijuana issue, if a parent is black and white, you should never smoke it, that's probably not going to be, you're going to have to navigate to tell me about your thoughts. What is your experience with it? The experience with it, my kid Dylan, was on the school bus. A kid had a parent who had medical marijuana, which is super powerful. So the marijuana that's in the dispensaries right now is 10 to 20 times more powerful than the stuff that we had when I was in high school. This is just the grade that's available. And then medical marijuana is even stronger than that. So a kid on the bus gives my son an ounce of medical grade marijuana. We don't know about this. One day he sets his phone down on the counter and he set it face down, which was just, Hollis thought, that's odd. And there are phones. And so Hollis said, I'm going to flip through it. And Dylan had gone out on the back of our property and rolled a joint the size of something that Cheech and Chong would smoke. And then had put on sunglasses and had taken a picture of himself smoking this cigar stogie. I mean, it was this, I had not seen a joint that big in my life. And took a picture of himself and left this on his phone. So Hollis, I come home from work, Hollis shows me, I go down to Dylan's room, and I said, so, you have amnesty for the next 5 minutes. I want all the drug paraphernalia in your room. And if I find any after the 5-minute mark, there is going to be a lot of things happening that you don't like. So he scrambled around his room. Where do you think he hid it? This is so 1960s. Speaker. They were in his speaker. That's what we did in high school. It was in our speaker. I'm like, are you kidding me? That is so unoriginal. So Hollis and I are like, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, at the time, Hollis was friends with Kim, who was the police chief in Sandy. So they had the new police station. Hollis called up Kim, said, hey, Dylan had pot. I'm going to bring him down to the station. And Kim was like, I know what to do. And so they get down to the station. Hollis goes into Kim's office. He turns it over, and she goes, okay. She goes, turn around. And she handcuffed him. She took him into the jail and closed the door and left him there. And she and Hollis went out and chatted for a while and came back in and said, I just wanted you to have this experience because you broke the law. And at your age, with the level of marijuana you had, this was a felony. And so this is what would happen to somebody if that happened. That had a big impression on Dylan. And we wanted somebody else to deliver that message, not us, because we want to remain in conversation. Kids, you want them to ask a question. David and I left youth group here. So David is what? He's like 13 or 14. And we have from here like a 25-minute drive home. And we're pulling onto the second to the last street, so we got about 3 minutes left. And the car has been quiet the whole way. And we turn onto this street, and David said, so I was wondering if you think you can be a Christian and smoke marijuana. He waited until there's 3 minutes left in the car to have this conversation, which there's ways to handle that. But I was so thankful that he felt comfortable asking that question. And as your kids go through their life, you don't know what they're going to be facing. I have no idea what my adult kids are going to be dealing with in their life, but I want to be known as askable. So what I would look at in that situation is, how can I conduct myself in such a way that my kid feels heard? And you can have, freedom within parameters. I mean, at some level, if your kid is going to smoke pot today, there is so much of it available, and kids share it. I don't know where all this pot comes from. They call it, my friend smoked me out, which means their friend gave them all the pot that they wanted. They'll do it during school hours. They'll skip class. They'll go over to the friend's house. Do you know what time of day most kids have sex? It's between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. Parents are usually at work. Their kids are unmonitored. That's a lot of pot smoking takes place at that point also. What you can say that in our family, what your dad and I, if you're a single parent, what I've decided is that we will have, our home will be a pot-free home. And so you're going to have to wrestle with your own decisions with this, but for our family at this point, I've decided that we're not going to have it in our house. And I think that may sound like too soft of a position to you, but at the end of the day, they can't own your decision. In other words, if you tell them you are not allowed to smoke it, don't tell them something you have no ability to control. You may say to me, well, on Amazon, I can buy urine tests, and you can. They're very inexpensive. It is and I've done it because we had a kid that got in trouble. That's how he got expelled. And so we had to institute urine tests, and it's degrading. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be having your kid pee in a cup, and that was a temporary measure. I have to tell you what David did because I'm a professional counselor and because I worked in Baltimore in a drug and alcohol center. So I'm talking Baltimore. Did any of you ever watch the TV show The Wire? Does this ring a bell with you? The drama The Wire, it's about drug use in Baltimore. It's about cocaine use in Baltimore. I worked in Baltimore in a drug center during the years that TV show portrayed. And so I have had to watch these inner city hardcore addicts. I had to watch them pee into the cup because they would bring in other people's urine and try and get it into the cup. And one night, one of my clients was able to do that. When he was going to the bathroom, he blocked me so I couldn't see what was happening. And then he turned around and handed me the vial, and it was warm. Well, it turns out he had like an IV bag up against his body that heated up the urine, and he got it into the cup. And I had so much fun telling him that he came back positive because he used his girlfriend's urine, who lied to him about, so he tested positive for a drug he didn't use. And when I told him he was positive, his face became contorted as it dawned on him. He's like, I don't use that drug. Wait a minute. Oh, no. David, I was insulted. We go down to do a urine test, and I didn't monitor him. I wasn't going to do that. And he comes out and he hands me a jar, and it's cold, and it's cloudy. And I'm like, okay, if this is urine from you, from your body, we need to go to the emergency room right now because you're dead. And he had gotten a friend to go to this is what people do, and you don't want to get into that position where you're setting your kid up to do that kind of thing. We had to do it, and we navigated through it, and we came out okay on the other side. It is not fun to do that. So make a decision for yourself that you're asking the kid to cooperate with, and you can have rules around the house, but don't say things that you can't enforce. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Where do you redeem it when there has been disruption, when you've failed or there's been a failure, when you've criticized or there's been criticism and conflict? Like, we need to redeem it now. Maybe I'm not the only perfect parent, but
I should have said this sooner. You want to get this right about 51% of the time. Okay. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. What works on our first kid, I don't know if anybody ever knew, well, our first kid, she was the kid that you looked at sideways and she went and did what she was supposed to do. In high school, she never had a curfew because we didn't need a curfew for her. In fact, her senior year, I was encouraging her to go act out, go do something. So on senior day, this is at the old high school, I'm delivering her brother, who's 3 grades behind, and I come around the corner on Bluff, and it's a traffic jam, and there's cops. And it's like, okay, this is senior day, it's probably not serious, but we're inching our way up to the high school, and we get to the high school, and the seniors had blocked the high school off with a wall of cars, so nobody could get into the parking lot. And the police were standing there drinking coffee at senior day, so we're gonna let these kids do this. In the center of the blockade was Rachel's truck, and she was standing on top of the truck with her arms folded like this. And I was like, yes, she finally stayed out all night and did something a little bit edgy. That was our first kid. She made us look like great parents. We didn't really deserve any credit for that at all. Then your next kid comes along, and it's the opposite of that first kid. And you're going to make mistakes, because what worked on the first kid doesn't work on the second kid, and what works on the second kid doesn't work on the third kid if you have that many kids. So shoot for 51%. Also, when you make a mistake, admit it and own it with the kids and say, here's what I was trying to do, I blew it. If you remember, social modeling, social modeling, social modeling, social modeling. If you admit mistakes to your kid, you make that a menu item for them so that they feel they can admit mistakes to you. Then, if you still need help beyond that, at that point, make sure you're talking to other parents about parenting, and if you need to do a parenting consult with a counselor to solve a particular situation, access that help. Counseling is not the answer to everything, but a counselor is not emotionally involved in your situation. And I can solve other people's parenting problems, and it's a lot more difficult for me to solve my own because I'm emotionally involved in that situation. If you get it right 51% of the time, and actually let me say one more thing. Let me give you 3 things in closing. Enjoying your child, knowing your child, and pursuing your child. If I have a 25-year-old person sitting in front of me, and I say to them, do you feel like your parent enjoyed you? And they say yes. Do you feel like your parent pursued you? And they say yes. And do you feel like your parent knew you? And they say yes. They're probably doing okay. Those are the 3 things that we hear adults regret about their childhood. It was a parent that didn't pursue them, that didn't show up for a reasonable amount of the activities. You don't have to be at all of them. It was a parent who didn't make themselves available to spend time with them. I had so many moms in the fall of 2020 say they were grateful for the pace of life because the pandemic shut everything down. And when we started to reopen, I again had moms telling me, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to go back to that pace of life. And as far as I can tell, we're right back at it. We have stepped right back into things, and we're probably even going faster than we were because we feel a deficit in the last couple of years. And by the way, there is a deficit. I know we don't trust research anymore. I thought about pulling this out, and I thought if I tell them I have research, they're all going to be like, okay, what kind of misinformation do you have? 3 years ago, I used to be able to say I have research. Anyway, this is actually what's called a meta-study. A meta-study is a study of all the studies done during the pandemic on 18 and under anxiety and depression. And at the end of the pandemic right now, the number of teenagers reporting depression, so prior to the pandemic it was 1 out of 10, and right now 1 out of 5 are reporting it. Anxiety at a clinical level before the pandemic was 1 out of 8, and post-pandemic now we're 1 out of 4. So kids are struggling, and I'm not painting the pandemic as some sort of, ideal time. What did happen was people had the ability to spend time together. Your most valuable commodity is your time. It is not the money or any other resources your family may have. It's your time. I don't remember the last time somebody came in and said, I'm seeing you because when I was a kid, my parents didn't buy me the latest iPhone. They come in because they had a sense that a parent didn't like them. or they had a sense that a parent there was no pursuit, they weren't interested in them. They had the sense that the parent didn't really enjoy them, and they had a conflictual relationship. If you can, the reason I focus on pursuit, knowing, and enjoying is all of you can do that. I forget the iPhones and the pot smoking and all of that. If you can keep in mind that I want to communicate to them, I want to know them, and I want to know what they think about these things. Not just to shut them down, but I'm actually curious about what their thinking is. And I enjoy spending times. We play together. We do fun things together. And I also pursue them, the things that are important to them. I have sat at so many sporting events, and I'm a people watcher, obviously, as a counselor, and I watch kids. I had one kid that was a swimmer. I didn't know that every gym in Oregon is too small for people to be in. It's also very sweaty, and if you don't know anything about swimming, you have no idea what's going on in the pool. It's a bunch of kids splashing around. Anyway, I tried to go to my daughter's meets, and I would watch the kids. They were watching the door for their parents to come through that door in time to make it for their heat. And it means so much to them. So pursue, know, and enjoy. And if you make mistakes, if they can feel pursued, known, and enjoyed, they're going to do okay. All right, I think I need to let you go. If you come back tomorrow night, we will focus a lot on identity formation and how to assist your child in that. So thank you.